A full team of young cheerleaders from Arizona vanished in 1995 after a performance, mysteriously disappearing and leaving behind only unanswered questions and devastated parents. But 20 years later, a hiker finds something shocking in the desert, a discovery that would change everything and reveal the disturbing truth. The Arizona sun streamed through the kitchen windows, casting long rectangles of light across the breakfast table where Marissa Green sat with her husband David. It was a typical morning in Chandler, Arizona, or at least as typical as mornings had been over the last 20 years, since their twin daughters had vanished without a trace. Marissa absent-mindedly stirred her coffee, her thoughts drifting as they often did to April and Amber. The girls would be 34 years old now. What would they look like? Would they have children of their own? These questions haunted her daily, though she had learned to live with the uncertainty. The sudden vibration of her phone against the wooden table startled her. She looked down, expecting to see a coworker or perhaps someone from her grief support group. Instead, she froze. The name Detective Holbrook lit up her screen. "It's Detective Holbrook," David said in a barely audible voice. His head snapped up from his newspaper, eyes wide with disbelief. Detective Liam Holbrook had been the lead investigator on their daughter's case, a case that had gone cold years ago despite media coverage and extensive searches. "Answer it," David urged, setting down his coffee cup with a trembling hand. Marissa slid her finger to accept the call, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Hello, Mrs. Green." Detective Holbrook's deep voice echoed through the speaker. "I hope I'm not interrupting your morning." "Not at all," Marissa replied, putting the call on speaker so David could hear. "Is everything okay? We have a significant update regarding your daughter's case," the detective said with a measured tone, though an undercurrent of urgency made Marissa's stomach tighten. "What kind of update?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. After 20 years of silence, any development seemed impossible. "Have you found?" "I can't explain everything over the phone," Detective Holbrook interrupted gently. "Could you and your husband come down to the station? The sooner, the better." David leaned forward. "We'll be there right away," he assured the detective. "Thank you. I'll be waiting." The call ended, leaving the kitchen in silence. For a moment, neither of them moved, as if afraid any sudden action might shatter this fragile moment of possibility. "Do you think it's—" Marissa couldn't finish the question, couldn't speak, the hope rising dangerously inside her. David reached across the table and took her hand. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." They stood from the table with renewed energy, leaving their half-eaten breakfast behind. Marissa grabbed her purse while David picked up his wallet and car keys. Within 5 minutes, they were pulling out of their driveway. The morning sun warmed the inside of the car as they drove toward the Chandler Police Department. "It's been so long," Marissa murmured, looking out the window at a city that had changed so much in 20 years. New buildings, expanded roads, a place their daughters wouldn't recognize. "I never thought we'd hear from Detective Holbrook again." David nodded, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I know. I tried to move on, but part of me never stopped waiting for this call." The station's parking lot was more crowded than usual. As they pulled into an open spot, Marissa recognized several vehicles, cars belonging to the parents of the other missing cheerleaders. Her heartbeat quickened. "The others are here too," she whispered. Inside the station, the familiar scent of coffee and cleaning products greeted them. The receptionist recognized them immediately, offering a compassionate smile as she directed them to a conference room at the end of the hallway. When they entered, they found 4 other pairs of parents already seated around a large table. Detective Holbrook stood at the front of the room. His once dark hair was now streaked with gray, and the lines around his eyes were deeper than Marissa remembered. "Mr. and Mrs. Green," he acknowledged them with a nod. "Please have a seat." As they settled into the remaining chairs, Marissa exchanged glances with the other parents, Linda and Robert Thompson, whose daughter Kira had disappeared along with the twins, Judith, and Michael Lee, parents of Hannah, Susan Collins, mother of Rachel and Peter, and Elena Rivera, parents of Lily. All of them connected by the same terrible event, the same 2-decade-long nightmare. Detective Holbrook cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. As I mentioned on the phone, we have a significant development in your daughter's case." He paused, his expression solemn. "Early this morning, a hiker deep in the Sonoran Desert discovered something that we believe is connected to your daughter's disappearance." He turned to a laptop on the table and tapped a few keys. An image appeared on the screen on the wall, a rusted metal suitcase, partially buried in sand beneath a large flat rock. The lid was open, revealing a pile of red and white fabric inside. "Cheerleading uniforms," Susan Collins whispered, bringing her hand to her mouth. Marissa leaned forward, straining to see the details in the photograph. The red fabric, though dusty and faded, was unmistakable, identical to the uniforms her daughters had worn the night they disappeared. The hiker had been with his dog when he made the discovery. Detective Holbrook continued. They were exploring an area far off the usual trails. Not many people go out there. Their dog picked up a scent and started digging. That's when they found the suitcase. "Where exactly was this?" David asked, his voice steady despite the emotion Marissa could see in his eyes. "About 50 kilometers from Chandler, in a remote section of the desert," the detective replied as he switched to another image, a wider shot showing the arid landscape surrounding the discovery site. "We've already sent a forensic team to process the area. We need to go there," Marissa said firmly, surprising even herself with her determination. "I need to see the place for myself." Other parents murmured in agreement, nodding urgently. Detective Holbrook frowned. "That's not necessary. We're bringing the suitcase and its contents back to the lab for analysis. The hiker will be coming in later today to give a formal statement." "Please," Linda Thompson pleaded. "After 20 years of not knowing, we need to see it with our own eyes." The detective looked around at their faces, then sighed. "I'll need to check with the field team first." He stepped out of the room, phone in hand. While he was gone, the parents exchanged theories in hushed voices. Marissa could barely focus on what they were saying. Her mind was racing with possibilities. Those uniforms had to have been placed there recently. Why now after so long? Detective Holbrook returned several minutes later. "The field team says you can go to the site, but you'll need to follow protocol. Stay behind the tape, don't touch anything, and follow the officer's instructions on scene." Relief flooded Marissa. "Thank you. We'll follow you there," David added. The detective nodded. "We'll leave in 15 minutes. The drive takes about an hour." As they exited the conference room, Marissa felt a strange mix of fear and hope. 20 years of wondering might finally be coming to an end. Today, she squeezed David's hand as they walked to their car, a silent reminder that whatever awaited them, they would face it together. The convoy of vehicles departed Chandler under the mid-morning sun. Detective Holbrook's unmarked police car led the way, followed by 5 civilian vehicles carrying parents desperate for answers. Marissa watched as the urban landscape gradually gave way to desert vegetation, her thoughts drifting back to the night her daughters disappeared. It had been a regional cheerleading competition. 14-year-old April and Amber, full of life, had performed brilliantly with their squad. The girls had called home after their performance, euphoric about their second-place finish. They promised to call again once they were on their way home. That call never came. By the time they arrived at the desert site, the sun was high in the sky, casting harsh shadows over the rugged terrain. They parked in an improvised lot next to several police vehicles and followed Detective Holbrook on foot for nearly a kilometer, walking silently across the compact earth. A white tent had been set up at the site, surrounded by yellow crime scene tape. Several officers and forensic technicians moved methodically around the area. As they approached, Marissa saw a man standing off to the side with a medium-sized dog on a leash, the hiker who had made the discovery. Detective Holbrook gestured toward him. "This is Chris Delaney, the man who found the suitcase. And that's his dog, Dusty." Chris stepped forward, extending his hand. He looked to be in his early 40s, with sun, weathered skin and kind eyes. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances," he said as he shook hands with each of the parents. "Thank you for finding this," Marissa said, her voice heavy with emotion. "You have no idea what this means to us." Chris nodded solemnly. "Dusty deserves most of the credit. He picked up the scent and wouldn't leave it alone. He started digging like crazy. The dog, an Australian Shepherd Labrador mix with intelligent eyes, sat obediently at his owner's feet. "Can we see it?" David asked, looking toward the tent. Detective Holbrook led them under the canopy, where the suitcase now rested on a folding table. Even from a distance, Marissa could see the red and white fabric of the cheerleading uniforms, carefully folded but showing signs of age and exposure. Based on the condition of the uniforms and the suitcase itself, a forensic technician explained, "We believe they were buried here relatively recently, perhaps within the last year or so." "Recently?" questioned Peter Rivera. "But our daughters disappeared 20 years ago. That's what makes this discovery so unusual," admitted Detective Holbrook. "It seems whoever hid these uniforms did so in a hurry. The burial was shallow, and the rock covering it wasn't particularly heavy, almost as if they expected no one to venture this far into the desert." As the parents gathered around the table to take a closer look at the evidence that might finally lead them to their daughters, Marissa noticed movement in the distant vehicles approaching. One was a news van, with the logo of a local station emblazoned on its side. Another was a sedan that looked vaguely familiar. When the sedan parked and its driver stepped out, Marissa felt a jolt of recognition. Vincent Caro, the girl's former cheerleading coach, was walking toward them with determination in his stride. He had aged since the last time she'd seen him. His once dark hair was now silver at the temples, but his athletic build and confident walk remained unchanged. "Marissa, David," he called out as he approached. "I came as soon as I heard." Detective Holbrook stepped forward to greet Caro, extending his hand. "Coach, thank you for coming so quickly." Caro shook the detective's hand firmly. "Of course. When it comes to my girls, I drop everything." Marissa noticed how he still referred to the cheerleaders as his girls. Even after 2 decades, Caro had remained deeply involved in the search efforts back then, using his connections and resources to keep the investigation alive long after the police had begun to scale back. "We've decided to report to the media about this new development," Detective Holbrook explained to the gathered parents. "This case affected our entire community 20 years ago. Hundreds of volunteers joined the search parties. People deserve to know that we've found something." Marissa watched as the reporters began setting up their equipment nearby. A young woman with a microphone was already speaking with one of the officers, nodding intently at whatever information she was receiving. Vincent Caro approached the table where the suitcase lay. He stared at the uniforms, his expression unreadable. "After all these years," he murmured, "I never stopped hoping we'd find them." He turned to Chris Delaney, who was still standing near the edge of the tent with his dog. "Thank you," he said sincerely, extending his hand to the hiker. "Your discovery might finally help us find some answers." Caro then moved among the parents, greeting each with a warm handshake or a gentle touch on the shoulder. When he reached Marissa and David, his eyes softened. "It's been a long time," he said quietly. "How are you holding up?" "As well as can be expected," David replied. "We heard you're no longer with the school." Caro nodded. "I left the school system about 10 years ago. I still coach cheerleaders independently, though. I started my own program." Before they could continue their conversation, a reporter approached with a cameraman in tow. "We'd like to interview the parents," she said, glancing at Detective Holbrook for permission. The detective nodded. "One at a time, please, and keep it brief." The interviews began, with each pair of parents expressing their renewed hope that this discovery could lead to finding their daughters, or at least to learning what had happened to them. Marissa watched as Susan Collins broke down mid-sentence, overwhelmed with emotion as she spoke about her daughter Rachel. When it was their turn, Marissa and David stood in front of the camera, holding hands for support. "Mrs. Green, how does it feel to have this new lead after 20 years?" the reporter asked. Marissa took a deep breath. "It's overwhelming. We've never stopped searching for our daughters. We've never lost hope. If April and Amber are out there somewhere, if they can see this broadcast, we want them to know we're still looking for them. We will never stop looking." "Mr. Green, what do you hope will come from this discovery?" David's voice was steady, though Marissa could feel his hand trembling in hers. "At the very least, closure. But what we truly hope for is what every parent in our situation hopes for, to find our daughters alive and bring them home. After the interview ended, Marissa realized she had left her water bottle and her camera in the car. I should go get them, she told David. I want to take some photos of this place with my good camera. My phone won't capture enough detail. I'll go with you, David offered. They approached Detective Holbrook to let him know their plan. That's fine, he said. But stay on the path we came in on. It's easy to get disoriented out here in the desert, and we don't need anyone else going missing today. They nodded in understanding and began the walk back toward the parking area. The midday sun beat down on them, heat rising in visible waves from the sandy ground. As they walked, Marissa scanned the surrounding landscape, taking in the vast solitude of the desert. Something on the horizon caught her attention, a truck partially hidden behind a ridge and what appeared to be two men moving around it. One seemed to be dragging something heavy toward the vehicle, while the other crouched behind a large cactus near some rocks. David whispered, touching her arm to stop her. Look over there. David followed her gaze. I see them. There's someone sitting in the truck too. What are they doing out here? Marissa wondered. Aloud. That's way too far from any trail for regular hikers. David squinted against the sun. They're probably just taking a break from off-roading or something. Marissa shook her head, her instincts telling her something was off. Why would someone be dragging a heavy sack if they were just taking a break? And what is that other guy doing by the rocks? Without waiting for David's reply, she changed direction, heading toward the distant truck. Marissa, David called, hurrying after her. What are you doing? The detective said to stay on the path. I just want to see what they're doing, she replied, quickening her pace. Something doesn't feel right. David caught up to her, gently grabbing her arm. This is dangerous. We should tell Detective Holbrook instead. By the time we get back to him, they might be gone, Marissa argued, pulling away. I need to know if this has something to do with our daughters. As they got closer, the men near the truck noticed them. Marissa raised her hand in greeting and called out, Hello. The reaction was immediate and alarming. The men shouted at each other, abandoning whatever they were doing. The one who had been dragging the sack threw it into the back of the truck, while the one by the rocks ran toward the vehicle with what looked like a shovel in his hands. Within seconds, all three men were in the truck, which roared to life and sped away, kicking up a cloud of dust behind it. Did you see that? Marissa exclaimed. They ran. In the last few seconds before the truck disappeared from sight, Marissa noticed a small sticker on the rear window, some kind of company logo. Instinctively, she pulled out her phone and tried to take a picture, but the truck was moving too fast and was already too far away. The resulting image was a blurry mess. That was a company logo on the rear window, she told David, her heart racing. Did you see it? David nodded grimly. I saw it, but I didn't recognize it. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the trail of dust left by the departing truck until it vanished in the distance. Then, driven by a mother's intuition and curiosity, Marissa began walking toward the spot where the men had been. Marissa, we have to go back, David urged, reluctantly following her. We're way outside the safe zone now. Just a little further, she insisted. I need to see what they were doing. When they reached the large cactus and nearby rocks, Marissa knelt to examine the ground. There was a freshly dug hole, similar to the one where the suitcase had been found. David joined her, carefully scanning the disturbed earth. There's something here, he said suddenly, reaching into the sand. He pulled out a small object, brushing off the dust clinging to it. Marissa gasped, bringing her hand to her mouth. Oh my God, David. That's Amber's earring. She took the tiny piece of jewelry from his palm with trembling fingers. Though tarnished and corroded from years in the desert, there was no mistaking the distinctive design, a small silver star with a red gem in its center. She had bought identical pairs for both twins on their 13th birthday, just months before they disappeared. Are you sure? David asked in a barely audible voice. Marissa nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I'm sure. I gave them to her for her birthday. She looked up at him, a mixture of hope and fear surging through her. David, those men must know something about what happened to our girls. They searched the area thoroughly, hoping to find more clues, but the men had been meticulous in removing anything else that might have been buried there. With the earring tightly clutched in her hand, Marissa finally agreed to return to the investigation site. "We need to tell Detective Holbrook right away," she said as they walked back. "Those men could be the key to finding our daughters." When they returned to the tent, Detective Holbrook was in a deep conversation with a forensic technician. The other parents were scattered around the site, some talking with officers, others simply watching the ongoing investigation with anxious expressions. "Detective," Marissa called urgently as they approached. "We need to speak with you immediately." Detective Holbrook excused himself from the technician and turned toward them, his expression shifting to concern as he saw their faces. "What happened?" "We found something," David explained, motioning for Marissa to show the earring. She extended her palm, revealing the worn piece of jewelry. "This is Amber's earring, I'm sure of it. I gave identical pairs to both girls for their 13th birthday." The detective frowned, taking the earring to examine it more closely. "Where did you find this?" Marissa and David exchanged glances before David answered. "About 800 meters from here we saw 3 men near a pickup truck. One was dragging something that looked like a heavy sack, and another was digging near some rocks. When they noticed us, they ran away," Marissa added. "We quickly went to the spot where they had been digging and found the earring in the sand." Detective Holbrook's frown deepened. "You went after 3 unknown men in a remote desert area. Do you have any idea how dangerous that was?" "We know," David acknowledged. "But we couldn't just let them go without investigating. These could be the guys who buried the suitcase," Marissa said firmly. "They might be checking their hiding spots after learning the police have been here all morning and could be destroying other evidence right now." By then, the other parents had gathered around, listening closely to the conversation. Vincent Carway made his way through the small crowd with a grave expression. "What's going on?" Looking between Marissa and the detective, Detective Holbrook held up the earring. "The Greens found this near where they saw 3 men acting suspiciously. Mrs. Green believes it belonged to her daughter Amber." Caro's eyes widened slightly as he looked at the piece of jewelry. "That does look like the earrings the girls used to wear. Were you able to get a good look at these men?" Detective Holbrook, turning toward Marissa and David. "We would recognize them if we saw them again. It was too far to see their faces clearly, but I think I remember the shape of one of their faces and what they were wearing," David admitted. "However, I noticed a company logo on the rear window of the pickup truck." "A logo?" The detective reached for his notebook. "Did you recognize it?" Marissa shook her head. "Not clearly, but I tried to take a picture." She pulled out her phone and showed him the blurry image. "I'm afraid it's not very helpful. Could you draw what you remember?" Detective Holbrook asked, handing her the notebook and a pen. Marissa took them hesitantly. "I'm not much of an artist, but I'll try." She began to draw with a furrowed brow in concentration, trying to recreate the logo she had glimpsed on the pickup truck's window. After a minute, she handed back the notebook. It was something like this, a stylized bird, maybe a phoenix with its wings spread around. 3 letters, C, P, and F. Linda Thompson, who had been quietly listening, suddenly stepped forward. "CPF. That sounds like Caro Performance and Fitness Group." All eyes turned to Vincent Caro, whose expression remained calm. "Caro Performance and Fitness," Detective Holbrook repeated, looking questioningly at the coach. Marissa's heart began to race. Could the cheerleading coach be somehow connected to the disappearance of their daughters? Caro raised his hands in defense. "My company sponsored the cheerleading team 20 years ago and funded most of the search operations after the girls disappeared. We were completely transparent during the investigation." "That's true," Detective Holbrook confirmed, addressing the parents. "Coach Caro Company was thoroughly investigated during the original inquiry. They provided financial support and volunteers when the official search was scaled back." "Did you get the license plate number of the pickup truck?" Marissa and David. "There wasn't one," David replied. "At least not one we could see without a plate." The detective made a note. "That's suspicious in itself." Michael Lee, Hannah's father, had also been trying to draw the logo. He held up his sketch. "Would it look something like this?" asked Marissa. His sketch showed a stylized bird with outstretched wings surrounding the letters CF in bold font. It was remarkably similar to what Marissa had been trying to describe. Yes, she confirmed, very much like that. That's definitely similar to the logo of my former company, Caro admitted, studying the drawing. But as I said, I sold that company 20 years ago before the girls disappeared. You sold it? And Detective Holbrook raised an eyebrow. To whom? To a businessman named Matthew Rance, Caro responded. He kept me on as a consultant for a while. That's why the company remained associated with me during the search operations. But I have had no official connection with CPF for nearly 2 decades. Detective Holbrook made another note. I'll need the details of that sale and current contact information from Mr. Rance. Of course, Caro agreed easily. Anything that can help find the girls. Meanwhile, the detective turned back to Marissa and David. Can you show us exactly where you saw these men and found the earring? Yes, David said. It's not far from here. I'd like to look for tire tracks, Detective Holbrook explained. If they left in a hurry, they might have left a trail we can follow. Marissa nodded anxiously. That's what I was thinking. The desert road they took isn't used often. Their tire marks could still be visible. The detective considered this, then nodded. I'll send a team to investigate the area and follow any trail we find, but I need you to stay here or return to the station. This could be dangerous. We understand, said David. Although Marissa seemed about to protest, we would at least like to observe from a distance. After a moment of hesitation, Detective Holbrook agreed. You can wait at the base camp we've set up, but that's as far as you can go. I mean it, he added, fixing them with a stern look. No more solo expeditions. While the detective gathered a small team of officers for the investigation, Chris Delaney approached with his dog, Dusty. I know the area pretty well, he offered. I could help guide your team. Detective Holbrook shook his head. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Delaney, but we can't risk civilian involvement at this stage. The hiker nodded in understanding. Of course, I just thought I'd offer my help. Marissa reached out to touch his arm. Thanks anyway, and thanks again for finding the suitcase. Without you and Dusty, we might never have gotten this far. Chris smiled softly. I'm glad I could help. Detective Holbrook ordered an officer to escort Marissa, David, and the other parents back to base camp, offering them the option to wait at a nearby restaurant for updates from the investigation team. As they walked away, Marissa handed the earring to the detective, who carefully sealed it inside an evidence bag. We'll find out what happened to your daughters, he promised, one way or another. Marissa nodded, desperately hoping he was right. After 20 years of uncertainty, they were finally close to getting answers. She could feel it. She just prayed those answers wouldn't break her heart again. The journey back to civilization seemed endless. Marissa stared out the window at the passing desert landscape, her mind racing with possibilities. Who were those men? What had they been doing in the desert? And most importantly, what did they know about April and Amber? Should we eat something? David suggested as they approached a small cluster of buildings: a gas station, a restaurant, and what looked like a general store. It could be hours before we hear anything from Detective Holbrook. Marissa nodded absent-mindedly. Food was the last thing on her mind, but she knew David was right. They needed to keep their strength for whatever was coming. They pulled into the restaurant parking lot, a dusty gravel patch with a few scattered vehicles. The neon open sign buzzed in the window, a cheerful contrast to the desolate surroundings. Inside, the restaurant was cool and dim after the bright desert sun. It had the typical small-town charm: red vinyl booths, a counter with swivel stools, and the smell of coffee and roasted onions lingering in the air. Some locals sat at the counter, sipping cups of coffee and chatting quietly. Marissa and David chose a booth in the back corner where they could talk privately while keeping an eye on the door. A middle-aged waitress approached with a coffee pot and 2 menus. Good afternoon, folks, she greeted warmly. Coffee while we decide, please, David replied, turning his cup upside down. After the waitress filled their cups and took their lunch orders: a club sandwich for David and a bowl of soup for Marissa, they sat quietly for a moment, both lost in their own thoughts. I can't believe we found Amber's earring after all this time, Marissa finally said in a low voice. It can't be a coincidence. David wrapped his hands around his coffee cup as if seeking comfort from its warmth. I know, but we need to let the police do their job, Marissa. These men could be dangerous. Marissa leaned forward, her eyes intense. But what if the police don't find them? What if those men know where our daughters are and we lose them again? We should go back to where we saw the truck and follow the trail ourselves. That's crazy, Marissa, David replied, keeping his voice low. The police have resources and training we don't. Besides, Detective Holbrook knows how to do his job. Does he? Marissa questioned, a trace of bitterness creeping into her voice. It's been 20 years, David. 20 years, and they found nothing. It took a random hiker with a dog to find that suitcase in the desert, and it wasn't even buried deeply. What does that tell you about how thorough the police have been? David reached across the table to take her hand. I understand your frustration, believe me, but going out into the desert on our own won't help April and Amber. It could make things worse. The waitress returned with their food, placing the plates down with practiced efficiency. Here you go. Can I get you anything else? No, thank you, David replied, offering a polite smile. As the waitress tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, Marissa froze, her attention caught by a silver glint on the woman's earlobe. It was an earring, a small star with a red gem in the center, identical to the one they had found in the desert, identical to the one she had given her daughters for their 13th birthday. Excuse me, Marissa said in a tense voice. That earring you're wearing, could I ask where you got it? The waitress seemed surprised by the question, but not alarmed. She touched the earring shyly. This old thing? A customer gave it to me years ago. He said it matched my eyes. She smiled at the memory. It's missing its pair, though. The man said he lost it somewhere along the way, but let me keep one from the pair if I want it. David, who had followed Marissa's gaze, now stared at the earring with the same stunned recognition. Was the customer a local? He asked, trying to keep his tone casual. The waitress considered the question. I'm not sure if he lives around here, but I've seen him come in now and then over the years. He's a real gentleman, always leaves a good tip. She gestured toward a corkboard on the wall behind them, covered with photographs. He's somewhere on our customer wall. Thank you, Marissa managed to say, struggling to keep her voice steady. Your earring is beautiful. With a smile and a nod, the waitress went to attend to her other tables. David and Marissa turned to examine the photo wall, searching for faces that might match the men they had seen in the desert. There were dozens of pictures, tourists posing with the staff, locals celebrating birthdays and anniversaries, truckers stopping for food on long trips across the Southwest. Do you see anyone familiar? Whispered to David. Marissa scanned the photographs carefully. Not many yet. Her cell phone suddenly rang, making her jump. She pulled it out of her purse, seeing an unknown number on the screen. Moving away from the booth for privacy, she answered. Hello, Mrs. Green. This is Officer Mendez from Detective Holbrook's field team. Yes, officer. Did you find anything? We followed the tire tracks to an abandoned cabin about 8 kilometers from where you saw the men, he explained. The van was there. Abandoned. Marissa's heart quickened, but the men were nowhere to be found. We searched the area thoroughly, including the cabin, but they were gone. The van was completely empty, no sack, no shovel, no personal items of any kind. Disappointment washed over her. So they got away. I'm afraid so, but we have seized the vehicle and are processing it for evidence. Detective, Holbrook wanted you to know we're not giving up. Thank you, Marissa said in a hollow voice. Please keep us informed. She ended the call and returned to the booth where David was waiting expectantly. They found the van abandoned near a cabin, she said, sliding back into her seat. The men are gone. David sighed, running a hand through his gray hair. At least they have the van. Maybe they'll find fingerprints or something. Marissa nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere on the waitress's earring and what it might mean. The coincidence was too big to ignore. Somehow, that earring was connected to her daughter's disappearance, and her best lead was serving coffee just a few feet away. Desperation clawed at Marissa's throat as she watched the waitress move among the tables, unaware of the importance of her jewelry. David was picking at his sandwich, but Marissa couldn't bring herself to touch her soup. The possibility that this woman might, unknowingly, hold a key to finding her daughters was overwhelming. When the waitress returned to refill their coffee cups, Marissa made a decision. "I need to talk to you about something," she said in a low, urgent voice. "It may sound crazy, but please hear me out." The waitress set down the coffee pot, her expression curious but not alarmed. "Is something wrong with your food?" "No, it's not that," Marissa assured her. "It's about your earring." David shot her a warning look, but Marissa continued. "This morning, I found the matching earring to yours out in the desert," she explained, watching the waitress's face carefully. "It belongs to my daughter, who disappeared 20 years ago along with 5 other girls from her cheerleading squad." The waitress's hand instinctively went to her earring, her eyes widening. "I don't understand." "The police found their cheerleading uniforms buried in the desert today," David added softly. "And then Marissa found our daughter's earring identical to the one you're wearing at another nearby site, where some men were digging." The waitress froze, looking between them as if trying to decide whether they were delirious or dangerous. "Do you believe it? Do you think this earring has something to do with your missing daughter?" "I know it sounds incredible," Marissa admitted, "but those earrings were a matching set. I gave them to my daughter for her 13th birthday, just months before she disappeared. The odds that you have an identical earring by pure coincidence." She left the sentence unfinished. The waitress sat down heavily in the empty seat next to David, her face pale. "The man who gave me this had no idea." She was silent, thinking deeply. "Do you remember who gave it to you?" asked softly. She nodded slowly. "I can't remember his name, but he has been here a few times over the years, though not so often recently. He's a friend of Gerald Laffinger, who lives on a ranch about 16 kilometers from here." Gerald Laffinger, Marissa memorizing the name. "He's a catering client," the waitress explained. "The restaurant delivers meals to his ranch every day." She glanced at her watch. "I have to make his delivery in about 20 minutes. Marissa and David exchanged meaningful looks. "I don't know if I can trust you," the waitress continued in a slightly hesitant voice. "Giving out client information could cost me my job, and jobs aren't easy to come by around here." "We understand," Marissa assured her. "But if these men have information about our daughters, about what happened to them, wouldn't you want to help?" The waitress considered this, then made a decision. "Look, I can't give you his address directly, but I deliver his order in 20 minutes. If by chance you follow me, well, I can't control who drives on public roads, right?" Relief flooded Marissa. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means to us. Just promise me," the waitress said, standing up. "If anything happens, don't mention my name. This is the only job I have." "We promise," David said solemnly. The waitress nodded and returned to the kitchen, leaving Marissa and David to quickly finish their meals and pay the bill. As they walked back to their car, David spotted a familiar figure at the gas station across the street, Chris Delaney, filling the tank of his pickup while Dusty watched from the passenger seat. Before they could approach him, the restaurant side door opened, and the waitress came out carrying several large insulated bags on the back of a small delivery motorcycle. She caught Marissa's glance briefly, then looked away as she secured the bags and climbed onto the bike. "Let's go," Marissa whispered, sliding into the passenger seat of their car. David started the engine and waited until the waitress rode onto the road before following her at a discreet distance. They drove in tense silence, the desert stretching endlessly on both sides of the road. After about 15 minutes, the waitress turned onto a dirt road marked by a weathered wooden sign that read, "Laffinger Ranch, private property." David drove past the turnoff, then stopped once they were out of sight. "Now what?" "We wait until she leaves. Then we approach the entrance," Marissa decided. "We'll ask to speak with Gerald Laffinger about his friend Matthew, the man who gave the waitress Amber's earring." "But that's risky, Marissa. I don't think we should do that. Maybe for today, we just observe. At least we know where his property is, and we can pass that information on to the police." They reversed and parked on a small rise that offered a view of the ranch entrance without being too visible. The property was surrounded by a tall wrought iron fence with security cameras mounted on the gateposts. Beyond the fence, they could see several buildings, a large main house, a couple of smaller structures that could be guest houses, and what looked like horse stables in the distance. The waitress had parked her motorcycle beside the gate and was delivering the catering. Ordered to a security guard. The size of the delivery suggested it was meant to feed many people, far more than a single ranch owner would need. What kind of ranch needs catering for dozens of people every day? Wondered aloud. Maybe he has a lot of ranch workers, Marissa suggested, though she shared the suspicion that something unusual was happening on Laffinger's property. After several minutes, the waitress collected her empty delivery bags and climbed back onto her motorcycle. They watched as she rode away, disappearing down the dirt road in a cloud of dust. "We should call Detective Holbrook," David said, waving his hand over his phone. Marissa considered this. "We have no concrete evidence that this Laffinger person is connected to the girl's disappearance. Just a chain of coincidences. I'm not sure the detective would drop everything to investigate based on that." As they weighed their next move, the ranch gate creaked open and a blue Jeep drove out. Inside were three men. Marissa immediately recognized them by their clothes and hats. They were the same ones they had seen earlier in the desert. "They're them," she hissed, ducking down in her seat. David tensed as the Jeep approached, passing by their parked car toward the main road. For a brief moment, as the vehicles crossed paths, Marissa made eye contact with one of the men in the back seat. "They saw us," she whispered, her heart racing. "We need to leave now." David started the engine and returned to the road, driving away from the ranch. In the rearview mirror, he could see the Jeep slowing down, then making a U-turn to follow them. "They're after us," he said, his voice tense with fear. Marissa turned in her seat to look behind them. The Jeep was gaining speed, clearly intent on catching up. "Drive faster." David pressed the accelerator, but their car was no match for the Jeep on the rough desert road. Within minutes, the Jeep caught up and swerved in front of them, forcing David to brake sharply to avoid a collision. The Jeep's doors opened, and the three men got out. At the same time, two more vehicles appeared from the ranch gate in the distance, speeding toward them. "David," Marissa breathed, fear gripping her throat. "What do we do?" But it was too late to escape. The men surrounded their car, one of them motioning for them to roll down the windows. "Get out of the car," his voice ordered, leaving no room for discussion or refusal. Marissa and David obeyed, stepping out into the hot desert air with their hands raised. "Who are you and why are you watching the ranch?" another man demanded. Marissa straightened her spine, finding courage in her desperation. "My name is Marissa Green. This is my husband, David. We're looking for our daughters who disappeared 20 years ago. We have reason to believe someone on this ranch may have information about them." The men exchanged glances. Then the first man spoke into a radio clipped to his shirt. "We have the desert couple. They say they're looking for missing daughters and are waiting for instructions." After a moment, a voice crackled over the radio. "Bring them in." Surrounded by the men with no chance of escape, Marissa and David were escorted to one of the newly arrived vehicles and driven through the gates of the Laffinger Ranch. Their search for answers had led them straight to what could be the lion's den. And Marissa couldn't decide whether to feel terrified or hopeful at the prospect of finally uncovering the truth about what happened to their daughters. The interior of the Laffinger Ranch was immaculately maintained, with well-kept lawns surrounding the main house and carefully tended flower beds lining the entrance. It looked like the retreat of any other wealthy person, peaceful, orderly, with no sign of the darkness Marissa suspected lurked beneath the surface. They were led to the main house through a side entrance and down a hallway decorated with expensive Western art. The men took them to an empty room that appeared to be some kind of study, with bookshelves lining one wall and a large desk dominating the space. The windows offered a view of distant mountains, the beauty of the landscape a stark contrast to the fear Marissa felt. "Wait here," one of the men ordered before searching them and confiscating their personal belongings, including their phones, wallets, and car keys. Then, without another word, they left the room and closed the door behind them. David immediately tried to open the door, but it was locked. "We've been caught," he said, his voice tense with anxiety. "We should have called Detective Holbrook." "It's too late for that now," Marissa replied, scanning the room for anything that might help. The desk drawers were locked, and there was nothing within reach that could serve as a weapon. "What do they want from us?" David wondered nervously, pacing. If they're involved in the girl's disappearance, why don't they just get rid of us in the desert? Why bring us here? Marissa shook her head. I don't know, but they must have a reason. They fell silent as footsteps approached the door. The door opened to reveal a burly man in his 60s, dressed in an expensive tailored suit. Despite the desert heat, his silver hair was neatly combed, and he wore a heavy gold watch on his wrist, a display of wealth and power. Mr. and Mrs. Green. He greeted them with a smooth, cultured voice. I'm Gerald Laffinger. I understand you've been asking about me. Where are our daughters? Marissa stepped forward. Please, have you seen them? Laffinger raised an eyebrow, apparently amused by her bluntness. Straight to the point, I see. But I'm curious what brings an older couple to my property spying on my men. My security team tells me they saw you earlier today in the desert, watching from a distance. And now you show up here. Care to explain? David placed a reassuring hand on Marissa's arm. We found evidence linking your ranch to the disappearance of our daughters 20 years ago, he said evenly. A cheerleading uniform buried in the desert, a pendant that belongs to our daughter Amber, given to a waitress at the restaurant by your friend, in a van with the CP logo, Marissa added. Caro Performance and Fitness, the company that used to sponsor our daughter's cheerleading squad. Laffinger's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, recognition. Perhaps, or caution. You've been busy, he acknowledged, but I'm afraid you've stumbled onto something you don't understand. Then explain it to us, Marissa challenged. Tell us what happened to our daughters. Laffinger sat on the edge of the desk, studying them with calculating eyes. Information comes at a very high price, Mrs. Green, and I'm not sure it's my place to give the explanation you seek. What price? Marissa asked desperately. We'll pay whatever it takes. Just tell us where April and Amber are. A cold smile spread across Laffinger's face. It's not about money, but since you've learned too much, I don't have many options left. He stood and moved toward the door, opening it to reveal the three men waiting outside. Take them to the special quarters if you want to see the women, he instructed. Make sure they're comfortable. They'll be staying with us for quite some time. But, sir, are you sure about the component placement? One of the men asked hesitantly. Yes, he replied coldly. I'll let that old dancer decide what to do with them. You can't do this, David protested as the men entered and grabbed their arms. People will look for us. The police know we were following a lead. The police, Laffinger sneered dismissively. Don't worry about them. It's easy to stage an accident in the desert. The car goes off the road, the gas tank ruptures. Very tragic. No one will come looking for you here. Despite their struggles and protests, Marissa and David were forcibly led out of the house, across an open yard stretch, and toward a large horse barn in the distance. Inside, the barn seemed normal at first glance, stalls for horses, storage for feed and equipment. But the men led them to what looked like a supply closet at the back of the building. One of them opened the door to reveal a staircase descending into darkness. Move, he ordered, pushing David forward. They went down the stairs, the air growing cooler and damper with each step. At the bottom was another door, this one made of heavy metal with a complex electronic lock. The man typed a code, and the door opened to reveal what could only be described as an underground bunker. The space was surprisingly large, with concrete walls and floors and fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. There were several cots against one wall, a small bathroom area sectioned off by a partial wall, and a tiny kitchenette in a corner. But what immediately caught Marissa's attention were the three women sitting on the cots, watching their entrance with wary, tormented eyes. The men forced Marissa and David to kneel in the center of the room, tying their hands to a metal pipe that ran from floor to ceiling. With that, they turned and left. The heavy door slammed shut behind them with a resounding thud that echoed through the silence. For a moment, there was silence as Marissa and David struggled to process what they were seeing. The women appeared to be in their 30s, the age their daughters would be now. They were thin, with pale skin that suggested they rarely saw the sun, but they were clean and seemed physically unharmed, although their eyes told a different story. Who are you? One of the women finally asked, her voice soft and hesitant. Before any of them could respond, heavy footsteps came down the stairs outside, and the door opened again to admit Gerald Laughing. He surveyed the scene with satisfaction. This is what I meant by the high price for information, he told Marissa and David. Now you'll have all the time in the world to learn the truth while you spend the rest of your lives in this cozy little bunker with the survivors. Survivors, David repeated, his voice breaking on the word. Laffinger ignored him, turning to address the women. Ladies, meet your new roommates. I'm sure you'll have plenty to talk about. He moved back toward the door, stopping as he reached it. Oh, and don't even think about helping them escape. Remember what happened last time someone tried that, right? The women visibly shuddered at his words, one of them looking away as if to hide tears. Laffinger left, the door closing behind him with the sound of multiple locks clicking into place. As his footsteps receded up the stairs, Marissa could hear him speaking to someone, his voice rising in anger. That damn dancer, he muttered. Give me a phone call with Matthew and Carway. Let's hope. Carway isn't talking to the police to save himself. The name sent a jolt through Marissa. Vincent Carway, the cheerleading coach, he was involved after all. Once Laffinger was gone, Marissa turned her attention back to the women, hope and fear battling her. Please, she said with a trembling voice, help us untie these ropes. The women exchanged uncertain looks. Then one of them stood and approached, turning to show her back as she did so. Her thin shirt did not hide the network of scars crisscrossing her skin, evidence of repeated whippings or beatings. This is what happens when we don't follow the rules, she explained quietly. If we help you, they'll do worse things. Marissa gasped in horror at the sight. I'm so sorry, she whispered. But please, we're looking for our daughters. April and Amber Green disappeared 20 years ago with their cheerleading squad. Do you know them? The woman froze, her eyes widening in apparent recognition. She slowly turned to face Marissa, studying her features carefully. Mom, whispered, her voice barely audible. Dad. Marissa's heart seemed to stop. April, Amber. The woman swallowed hard. I'm April, she confirmed, tears filling her eyes. David made a choked sound beside Marissa, struggling against his bindings. April, her voice thick with emotion. My God, we found you. April hesitated, then knelt down and began working on the knots binding her hands. Her movements were quick but cautious. We can't make noise, she warned in a whisper. Sometimes they monitor this room. As she worked, Marissa took in the sight of her daughter, a woman now, her face showing the toll of whatever horror she had endured, but still, recognizably the girl they had lost. What happened to you? Marissa asked, tears running down her face. Where is Amber? April paused, pain crossing her features. Only 3 of us survived, she said softly. Me, Kira Thompson, and Han Lee. She nodded toward the other 2 women watching the reunion with a mix of hope and caution. Rachel died from complications of a sexually transmitted infection a few years ago. They refused to get her proper medical care. Marissa closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the horror of what her daughter was telling her. And Amber? She managed to ask, though part of her already knew the answer. April's hands trembled as she continued working on the knots. Amber and Lily were killed for trying to organize an escape with the rest of us. That was the last time any of us tried to run. They made us watch, to teach us a lesson. A sob escaped from Marissa's throat. The pain of knowing her other daughter had been killed was almost unbearable. David was openly crying beside her, his shoulders shaking with grief. I'm so sorry, April whispered, finally freeing Marissa's hands. I never thought I'd see you again. What are you doing here? How did you find us? As April moved to untie David, Marissa explained about the suitcase found in the desert, the earring, and how they had followed the waitress to the ranch. The police know we were following a lead, she assured her daughter. They'll come looking for us when we don't return. April shook her head, her expression somber. Mom, if they're as good at covering their tracks as they've been for 20 years, no one will find us here. This bunker is soundproof. We've screamed and shouted for help 1,000 times. No one ever hears. David, now free, pulled April into a tight embrace. We won't give up, he promised. We'll find a way out of here. Kira and Han cautiously approached, introduced themselves, and Marissa hugged them both, thinking of their parents who had waited so long for answers. Their parents never stopped looking for them, she told them. Neither did we. Who did this to you? Who kidnapped you? David asked, his pain turning to anger. Kira spoke up, her voice stronger than April's. It was Coach Carway. He and his men drugged us after the competition and brought us here. Laffinger owns this place, but Carway is the one who uses us. And there's another man, Hen added. Matthew Rance. He handles logistics for Carway's company. Everyone thinks he owns it, but it's really Laffinger behind everything. They just use Matthew as a front. Marissa remembered what Detective Holbrook had said about Caro selling his company 20 years ago. So Caro lied about selling the company. He realized that. He just put it under Matthew's name to distance himself in case anyone got suspicious. April nodded. Carway visits once a month, but other than that, we just stay down here. No one is allowed to touch us except him. Not even Laffinger or Matthew. We are his special girls. The horror of their situation was overwhelming as the hours passed. Just when they were beginning to gather the courage to talk about escape, distant noises echoed from above screams, and what sounded like gunshots. April ran to help David find something they could use to signal their presence, choosing a metal food tray, which he began banging against the pipe they had been tied to. The noise was deafening in the confined space, and they took turns hitting rhythmically and shouting for help. Despite April's insistence that the bunker was soundproof, they had to try. Minutes that felt like hours passed. The gunfire above eventually fell silent. Then, miraculously, they heard movement on the stairs, followed by voices calling out, "Police! Is anyone down there?" Hope surged through Marissa as everyone shouted back, guiding the rescuers toward the closed door. After several tense moments, the electronic lock disengaged, and the door opened to reveal several police officers in tactical gear with weapons drawn. One of them held a car electronic key, probably taken from the men who had captured them. "We need medical assistance," one officer called into his radio while assessing the situation. "We have 5 civilians. They appear to be the missing persons and 2 more." As they were led up the stairs and out of the barn, Marissa held April's hand tightly, afraid that if she let go, her daughter might disappear again. Outside, the ranch was crowded with police vehicles and ambulances. Several bodies lay on the ground, covered with sheets, men who had resisted arrest and had been shot by the police. Near the main house, Marissa spotted Detective Holbrook coordinating the operation. Beside him were Chris Delaney and the waitress from the restaurant, both looking relieved to see Marissa and David emerge safely. Gerald Laffinger and the 3 desert men were being loaded into separate police patrol cars, handcuffed and under heavy guard. "Detective," Marissa called out, her voice breaking with emotion. "We found them. We found our daughter April and Kira and Hannah too, but the others didn't make it." Detective Holbrook approached quickly, his expression a mix of shock and relief. "Mrs. Green, Mr. Green, are you okay? We've been searching for you since the hiker and the waitress reported your disappearance. Vincent Carway is behind all of this," David told him urgently. "He took the girls 20 years ago. He's been keeping them here as prisoners all this time." The detective's expression hardened. "We just interviewed Carway at the station a few hours ago." He turned to a nearby officer. "Notify all units. Priority 1, locate and apprehend Vincent Carway. Consider him dangerous. Block all city exits and search his residence immediately." As paramedics approached to check them for injuries, Marissa felt a complex mix of emotions: joy at finding April alive, devastating grief for Amber, and a burning determination to see justice done. They had found some answers, but the full truth of what had happened to their daughters and the other girls was still emerging, a truth more horrifying than they could have imagined. The police station buzzed with activity. Additional officers had been called in to handle the developing case, and reporters gathered outside, alerted by radio chatter about a major breakthrough in the 20-year-old disappearance that had haunted Chandler for 2 decades. Marissa, David, and April sat together in a small interview room, unwilling to be separated for even a moment. April held her parents' hands tightly, as if afraid they might vanish if she let go. Down the hall, Kira and Han were giving their statements to other officers, each accompanied by a victim advocate. Detective Holbrook entered carrying a tray with glasses of water and a box of tissues. His face showed the strain of the past hours, but there was determination in his jaw. "We have checkpoints on all the main routes out of the county," he informed them. Carway won't get far. Has he fled already? David asked. The detective nodded sternly. The officers found his house empty, closets cleared out. He must have fled as soon as he left the police station this morning, but we will find him. He turned his attention to April. I know this is difficult, but we need to understand exactly what happened both 20 years ago and since then. Are you willing to answer some questions? April took a deep breath and nodded. I want to tell you everything. I want them to catch him and punish him for what he did to my sister. Detective Holbrook activated a recording device and placed it on the table. For the record, could you please state your full name? April Michelle Green, she answered, her voice stronger than it had been in the bunker. I was kidnapped on May 17, 1995, along with my twin sister Amber and 4 other girls from our cheer squad. Can you tell us what happened that night? April closed her eyes briefly, gathering her thoughts. We had just finished competing in a regional championship. We placed second. Everyone was celebrating in the locker room, changing to go home. She paused, swallowing hard before continuing. Coach Caraway asked Rachel Collins to stay behind to discuss her performance. The rest of us went to the convenience store across the street to get sodas. When we returned, we found Coach Caro touching Rachel inappropriately in the storage room. Marissa squeezed her daughter's hand in support as April continued. Rachel was crying, but the coach kept telling her it was okay, that she was special, that he was going to make her a star if she became his spiritual wife. That's what he called it, his spiritual wife. When he saw us standing there, he tried to cover it up. He said Rachel was upset about a mistake in her routine and that he was consoling her. What happened next? Gently urged Detective Holbrook as April fell silent. We knew something was wrong. Lily Rivera said we should tell our parents or the school principal. The coach got very angry, left the room, and we thought he was going to try to talk his way out of it. But instead he came back with 3 men, the same ones from the ranch. They had syringes. Her voice broke, and she took a moment to compose herself. They injected us with something. I remember feeling dizzy. Then nothing until I woke up in that bunker. All 6 of us were there. Rachel told us that the coach had been inappropriate with her for months. She wasn't the only one. He had targeted several girls on the squad, promising them special training and future careers if they would be his spiritual wives. Some agreed because they believed his promises to make them professional cheerleaders. And after your kidnapping? Asked the detective. April's grip on her parents' hand tightened. At first, we thought we would be rescued quickly. We knew our parents would be looking for us, that the police would be searching. But days turned into weeks, then months, then years. She described how Caro would regularly visit the bunker, selecting one of the girls to serve him during his stays. Laffinger and Matthew Rance handled the day-to-day operations of our captivity, providing food and basic necessities, but keeping us isolated from the outside world. Rachel got sick about 5 years ago. April continued, her voice hollow. She had infections, fevers. We begged them to take her to a doctor, but they wouldn't. They gave her some antibiotics, but it wasn't enough. She died down there without ever seeing her family again. Marissa wiped tears from her eyes thinking of Susan Collins, who would never see her daughter alive again. And Amber, gently asked Detective Holbrook, what happened to her and Lily? April took a shaky breath. About 3 years ago, we planned an escape. Amber had managed to steal a key card from one of the guards during a moment he was distracted. We waited until midnight when we thought everyone would be asleep. Her voice faltered. David put his arm around her shoulders. We almost got out of the barn, he whispered. But the alarm went off. The guards came from everywhere. Amber and Lily were at the front. They were caught first. Carway was furious. He said he needed to make an example to ensure our continued obedience. He couldn't go on, overcome by the memory of what had happened to his twin sister. Detective Holbrook waited patiently, giving her the time she needed. He killed them, April finally managed to say. He made us watch as he strangled them. He said if any of us tried to escape again, the same would happen. After that, we knew there was no hope. We just tried to survive day by day. The detective's face was grim as he took notes. And the ranch, what was it used for besides keeping you captive? Money laundering, I think, April replied. Sometimes we overheard conversations. Caro Company was a front for something bigger. They talked about shipments, distribution routes. I think they were involved in drug trafficking. That would explain the catering deliveries, David reflected. Food for workers involved in the operation. Detective Holbrook nodded. We will investigate those angles thoroughly. The FBI is on the way. This falls under their jurisdiction with the trafficking and kidnapping elements. He turned to April. You mentioned the earrings earlier, the ones your mother gave you and Amber for your birthday. Do you know how one of them ended up with the restaurant waitress? April nodded. Matthew Rance took them from Amber after she was killed. I heard him tell one of the guards he thought they were pretty. Later I heard him brag about giving one to that pretty waitress at the restaurant. He kept the other as some kind of trophy. And the cheerleader uniforms? Why were they buried in the desert recently after all this time? I'm not sure, April admitted. But a few weeks ago there was an argument between Caro and Laffinger. Carway wanted to get rid of evidence, things that could connect him to us if they were ever found. He told Laffinger to take care of it. Maybe that was when they decided to hide the uniforms. But Laffinger's men were careless. They always thought the desert could hide anything. As the interview continued, more details emerged about the horrible captivity the young women had endured for 20 years. By the time they finished, the sky outside had darkened and Detective Holbrook looked exhausted but determined. We'll need more statements in the coming days, he told them. But you've given us enough to work with for now. The FBI will also want to talk to you. What happens now? Marissa asked, her arm still protectively around April's shoulders. First, we need all of you checked at the hospital, he replied. Then we'll arrange safe housing. This case is going to attract a lot of media attention, and we need to protect your privacy while the investigation continues. Just then, another officer appeared at the door, urgently signaling Detective Holbrook. He apologized and stepped out. Through the glass panel of the door, they saw him receiving what looked like important news, his expression shifting from concern to grim satisfaction. He returned moments later. We've got him, he announced. The highway patrol stopped Carway trying to cross into New Mexico about 30 minutes ago. He's being transported back to Chandler as we speak. Relief flooded Marissa. The monster who had stolen her daughters, who had murdered Amber, would finally face justice. It wouldn't bring back the dead, but it was a start. Is there anything else? Detective Holbrook added. The team has already started processing the ranch. They've found financial records linking Carway, Laffinger, and Matthew Rance to a large-scale drug trafficking operation. The ranch, the cheerleaders, and the fitness business were just a front. April nodded tiredly. I always suspected something like that. The men who brought us our food sometimes talked about shipments and deliveries that had nothing to do with us. As they were preparing to go to the hospital, the door opened again to reveal the restaurant. Waitress escorted by an officer. She approached hesitantly, her eyes red from crying. I'm so sorry, she said to Marissa and David. If I had known what that earring meant, who those men really were. You helped save our daughter, Marissa assured her, standing up to embrace the woman. We can never thank you enough for that. The waitress reached into her pocket and pulled out the earring she had been wearing. This belongs to your family, she said, placing it in Marissa's palm. I don't deserve to keep it. Marissa closed her fingers around the small silver star, thinking of its pair that had led them to April. Such a small thing to have played such a crucial role in solving a 20-year mystery. Thank you, whispered the officer who had accompanied the waitress. The hiker, Mr. Delaney, wanted me to tell you he's glad you are safe. He was the one who noticed you had disappeared and alerted us. He and the waitress realized they might have followed her to the Laffinger Ranch and came to the station together. Marissa made a mental note to properly thank Chris Delaney when she had the chance. Without his discovery of the suitcase and his subsequent concern for their safety, they might never have found April. As they left the interview room, they passed open doors where other meetings were taking place. Kira with her parents, Linda and Robert, sobbing with joy as they hugged their long-lost daughter. Hannah with her father Michael, her mother Judith having passed away 3 years earlier, never knowing her daughter was alive. In the main area of the police station, Marissa spotted Susan Collins and the Riveras, being gently informed by officers that their daughters had not survived. Their anguished screams cut through the bustling activity of the station, a raw reminder that even in this moment of Partial triumph. There was still profound loss. April stopped, watching them with tears in her eyes. I wish I could have saved them, she whispered. Rachel, Amber, Lily. They deserve to come home too. You survived, David said softly. You kept the truth alive. Thanks to you, their stories will be told, and the men responsible will pay for what they did. Marissa pulled her daughter close, savoring the miracle of holding her in her arms again after 20 years of emptiness. The road ahead would not be easy. April and the other survivors had years of trauma to process, and the family had to learn to live with both the joy of April's return and the confirmed loss of Amber. But for now, in this moment, they were together. It was more than Marissa had dared to hope. For when she woke that morning to a phone call from Detective Holbrook, a chapter of their lives that had remained painfully unfinished for 2 decades was finally coming to an end, making way for whatever would come next. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, don't hesitate to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell to watch more fascinating stories. Have a great day.